Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. I'm very happy to welcome you to Queer Writing, Writing Queer Diasporic Dialogue between the Middle East and Brazil. My name is Nadje, and I'm the director of the Center for Middle East Studies here at Brown. I'm also professor of anthropology and Middle East Studies. This year, the Center for Middle East Studies is hosting a number of initiatives to foreground issues around gender and sexuality, as well as racialization and racism. And as part of these two initiatives, we are collaborating on a couple of events with the Brazil Initiative. And the idea is really to challenge the exceptionalism that is often associated with the Middle East, especially when it comes to issues around gender and sexuality. And particularly when it comes to Brazil and the Middle East, they're often put in polar opposites in terms of expressions of gender and sexuality. And in today's event, where we are focusing on queer writers from both regions, we would like to challenge this. And now, before handing over to my colleague, Professor Jeremy Lehnen, who is the head of the Brazil Initiative, I just would like to briefly thank the Pembroke Center, especially the program in Gender and Sexuality Studies, as well as Portuguese and Brazilian Studies, who are collaborators in today's event. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Nadje, and thank you to everyone for being here today. My name is Jeremy Lehnen. I'm the director of the Brazil Initiative and the associate director at the Pembroke Center. I also would like to reiterate this wonderful opportunity that we have to work with the Center for Middle East Studies. And thank you, Nadje, for spearheading much of this and getting everything moving. Thank you also to the Watson Institute, Center for Middle Eastern Studies, Portuguese and Brazilian Studies, and the Pembroke Center. And so, yeah. The Brazil Initiative, for anyone who has not heard of it, et cetera, is an initiative that James Green started about 8 years ago here at Brown. It's been central in promoting Brazil at many fronts throughout the years here on campus and abroad. And so hopefully we are continuing that tradition. All right, and I will, let's see. So I will start by introducing our panelists today. I will introduce Sugina Da Silva. Sugina Da Silva is a writer, professor, and the editor of Kwanzaa Produções. She has published, well, more than 17 in a couple of days here, books including chronicles, short stories, essays, plays, and literature for young adults. Um Eixo em Nova York received the National Library Award for the Book of Short Stories in 2019, and Explosão Feminista, which is an essay which she co-authored, was a finalist for the prestigious Jabuti Award and received the 4th Prêmio Rio Literatura, both in 2019. In, I believe, 7 days, Cidinha will be releasing her most recent book, O Margem Reinventa os Rios, and I would encourage you all to attend the lançamento that Cidinha has planned. You can find information on that on Cidinha's Facebook page, as well as my Facebook page and the page of the Brazil Initiative. Currently, she is also the curator and anchor of the web program Almanac Encruzilhar. Natalia Borges Polesso received her doctorate in literary theory from the PUC Rio Grande do Sul and is a professor, writer, and translator. She published Recortes para Álbum de Fotografia Sem Gente in 2013, Amora in 2015, Controle in 2019, and Corpos Secos in 2020, among other works. And everyone is waiting very anxiously for the release of A Extinção das Abelhas, The Extinction of Bees, in 2021. We all want 2020 to end. In 2017, Natalia was selected for the Bogotá 39 list, which brings together the 39 of the most prominent writers under the age of 40 in Latin America. She is currently a researcher in the National Postdoctorate Program at the Universidade de Caxias do Sul, where she is conducting research on lesbian geographies. Natalia?
Nadje. It's okay. I would like to welcome you both, Cidinha and Natalia. It's wonderful to have you. And I'm now, it's my pleasure to introduce now the two speakers who originate in the Middle East. The first speaker is Raphael Khouri. Raphael is a queer transgender Arab documentary playwright and theater maker living currently between Berlin and Egypt. Hello, Raphael. Raphael is the author of several plays, including the first ever trans-Arab play, She, He, Me, which was originally performed at the Cosmos Theater in Vienna in 2019, I believe, and also recently performed online as part of the New York City's Criminal Queerness Festival. His other plays include Ich brauche meine Ruhe, I like that, meaning I need my rest, which was performed Politik im Freien Theater Festival in Munich in 2018, and No Matter Where I Go, which was performed in Beirut in 2014. Raphael is also a part of the climate change theater action. His plays, Oh, How We Loved Our Tuna, was read internationally as part of this initiative. Khouri's work, Raphael's work, will also appear in the upcoming international queer drama anthology published by Neophelis Verlag in 2020 and the Metun anthology of trans plays also out later this year. Welcome, Raphael. Now, our fourth guest today is Saleem Haddad. Saleem was born in Kuwait City to an Iraqi-German mother and a Palestinian-Lebanese father. So we share something there, Saleem. His first novel, Guapa, published in 2016, is a political and personal coming-of-age story of a young gay man living through the 2011 Arab revolutions. It was awarded the Stonewall Book Award and won the 2017 Polari First Book Prize. Saleem was also selected as one of the top 100 global thinkers of 2016 by Foreign Policy magazine. His directorial debut, Marco, premiered in March 2019, was nominated for the 2019 Iris Prize for Best British Short. Welcome, Saleem. Okay, so yes, I was wondering if you could all reflect initially on the question of how did you come to writing? How did your trajectory into writing, and what does it mean to you? So why don't we start with Cidinha? And I should say that we have simultaneous translation available. So Cidinha is going to speak in Portuguese, and you can see down on the bottom of your screen interpretation. If you choose the English channel, you will hear the English translation. Okay, welcome, Cidinha.
Thanks. Muito boa tarde. É uma grande alegria estar na Universidade do professor Anani de Genzio, de Gana, o primeiro afro-brasilianista a estudar o Brasil ainda em 1970, no auge da ditadura civil-militar. O professor Anani se ancestralizou no final do mês passado, não é? No final de outubro. Ele nos deixou e retornou à massa primordial no país dos ancestrais. Eu saúdo o professor Anani e peço licença para entrar na Brown University, que foi sua casa durante tantos anos. Eu peço licença também à minha irmã, o Ania, que estudou na Brown nos anos 90 e foi quem me apresentou o professor Anani. Agradeço a vocês pelo convite e, para responder essa primeira questão, né, a literatura chegou à minha vida pela leitura, quando eu era criança ainda, e tive contato lá pelos 10 anos com aquilo que a gente chama aqui no Brasil de cronistas, né, que são escritores que se dedicam a escrever, a criar a partir da observação do cotidiano. Acho que é um gênero que talvez não seja tão familiar para vocês, mas para a gente aqui no Brasil é muito, muito comum. Então, foi esse gênero que me despertou o interesse pela escrita. A partir da leitura desses cronistas, eu tive o desejo de escrever as minhas próprias histórias. E eu escrevo para compartilhar com o mundo os meus universos, para criar mundos a partir das referências que são importantes para mim. É por isso que eu escrevo e é dessa forma que eu coloco a minha literatura no mundo.
Thank you very much, Cidinha. Raphael, what about you?
I started writing in high school in the library when I was getting bullied for being transgender. I think it was, I mean, if I look back, it was a kind of way of insisting on finding beauty while things were getting ugly around me. I don't think I've really talked about that, so maybe it's the first time I say that publicly. Later on, I actually wanted to do theater and I wanted to act. And again, that was difficult for me, being born female in Jordan. That was not considered something that women could do or that was respectable. And so I thought I'll become a director. And as I was doing an internship with a director in Beirut, I couldn't find the scripts that I wanted to direct. They were there was a lot of translations of cisgender white men being performed in Arabic, and it didn't really speak to me. And I was working as a journalist, and I was becoming good at interviewing people. And I heard about documentary theater at a conference I was at. There was a German dramaturg talking about that, and it kind of blew my mind. And I said, well, maybe I could try to do this. I had never seen a documentary play, but I thought, I'll try to do it. And that's one thing led to another, and here I am. I interviewed my friends, and then that was it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Natalia, and what about your trajectory into writing?
Well, I guess I can say I've always been curious about words and what they meant. So since I was a kid, I loved playing with words, and also I have to say that I lived a part of my life with my grandmother, and I think I was 6 years old. My parents had to move, and I stayed with her. And then, of course, I was a kid. I was lonely. I was feeling left by my parents. Of course, they came to pick me up later that year, but felt like an eternity. And I remember my grandmother telling me those stories about cows and how life was in the country and etc. And that opened a world to me. So I guess for me it was first storytelling, then writing itself. But as I told you before, I've always been curious about words, and I've always liked playing with the poems, small riddles and things. So I think it was kind of this way when I was in school, but I've never thought I could be a writer. That was not a profession in Brazil. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor or a physical education teacher, but a writer is something that you think, how does it work? How is it? Because I didn't know any living writers. I thought all of them were dead men. So how could a girl become a writer? But it turned out that, yeah, I became a writer. But it was with a lot of work. And I always like to say that I am a writer because I want, because I love to write, and also because I can. And this is not banal because not everyone can afford to be a writer. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. And Saleem, how did you get into writing?
Well, I think I was very much into writing when I was much younger, and I remember being a nerdy kid in high school, writing and directing plays that all of the beautiful people acted in, until my father yanked me out of drama class and said that that I needed to prepare myself for a real job. So he was trying to get me into medicine, but that failed. And then I think when I was in college, I took a turn and went into activism. And I think, you know, it was during the context of the Palestinian Intifada, and then after that, 9/11 and the Bush-Cheney wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So my late teens and early 20s were centered very much on activism and less so literature and storytelling. And I was doing some aid work as well in my early 20s. So I was traveling to Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon. And my life did not have the space for literature. And ironically, it wasn't until the Arab Spring where I think I returned to fiction and to storytelling. I had been spending a lot of time traveling to a lot of the countries that were impacted by the revolutions, and meeting with activists and government officials and trying to understand my own relationship to everything that was happening in these contexts. And I didn't feel like I had the space to explore a lot of the contradictions and ambivalence that I was feeling about everything that was happening. And that was when I began to write fiction, because it was there that I felt that I could explore a lot of the grayness that I didn't find the space for in either activist opposition politics or sort of, you know, the general government propaganda that was there at the time. And that was sort of how I began to work on Guapa, and that was the context in which Guapa emerged.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have to say, you know, as an anthropologist to sort of writing, academic writing, I'm constantly confronted with the limitations of academic writings, especially, you know, as you say, the nuances and the grainness and the sort of visions and imagination. So I am hoping at one point to, you know, also try out more creative writing. But I'm going to hand over to Jeremy. I know, Jeremy, you have a number of questions that you'd like to pursue. But thank you all for your answers.
Thank you, Nadje. So we have a series of 5 questions that we have proposed to our panelists. I'll go through them quick, and then we will give everyone a chance to speak briefly to those questions as kind of guiding questions for this conversation. They are: what does it mean to be a queer writer in a context of increasing authoritarianism? What spaces, both literal and figurative, have opened up and shrunk in your respective contexts? How does literature enable you, literature or theater, to enable you to address questions differently or different questions than may otherwise be possible? What is the power of the literary arts or theater arts in our current socio-political conjecture? And do you see yourself and your writing as part of a diaspora, possibly a queer diaspora? So we'll follow the same order as previously, to just kind of keep a semblance of structure. So, Cidinha.
Bem, deixa eu ver a ordem das perguntas aqui. Sendo uma mulher negra no Brasil, né, o contexto de autoritarismo, de opressão aos direitos, de ataque aos direitos, de perda de direitos de cidadania e também de direitos humanos, isso é uma constante para a população negra. O que a gente tem de novidade é a legitimação do autoritarismo, é a legitimação da morte, a legitimação da necropolítica. Essa é a novidade. Todas as máscaras caíram e a política de morte tornou-se uma política de Estado apoiada por grande parte da população brasileira. E essa política de morte atinge outros sujeitos, além dos sujeitos negros, né? As populações indígenas têm sido muito atingidas, os grupos LGBT também, né? São grupos prioritariamente, declaradamente atingidos por esse governo, né? Indígenas e a população LGBT. A população negra já vinha nesse processo, e como as questões de racismo, de maneira pública, elas são mais associadas às populações negras aqui no Brasil, cria-se uma certa cortina de fumaça para que as coisas que acontecem com esses grupos não sejam associadas ao racismo, que é um comportamento de maneira comum, né, socialmente reprovável. Então, o que se faz contra os indígenas não é posto na categoria de racismo, como aquilo que se faz contra as pessoas negras, né? Então, o que a gente tem de novidade é a legitimação desse processo, mas esses grupos já vêm enfrentando isso ao longo dos anos. Novos espaços abertos no sentido literal e figurativo, olha, de verdade eu não vejo, principalmente nesse contexto de pandemia. Está todo mundo preocupado em sobreviver, em garantir mínimas condições de sobrevivência saudável. É quase algo diletante pensar nesse momento em espaços literais ou figurativos que tenham sido abertos para a produção literária. Eu, pelo menos, não consigo pensar nisso. Eu tenho me ocupado nesse período, nesses últimos 7, 8 meses, eu tenho me ocupado em sobreviver, em manter a cabeça e o corpo saudáveis, porque nós, pessoas negras, somos alvos, somos um dos alvos preferenciais dessa política de morte, a qual a pandemia, né, de Covid-19 tem servido tão bem. Então, a preocupação é sobreviver, é estar viva, é conseguir ficar viva. Qual o poder da literatura na conjuntura política atual? Eu acho que o poder da literatura é sempre o poder de transgressão. A gente sempre tem a possibilidade de transgredir, de sair da norma, de sair daquilo que é esperado, que a gente veja, que a gente fale, que a gente analise, né? Criar a despeito da política de morte é algo importante. E, no meu caso, em particular, eu me ocupo muito das tecnologias ancestrais de produção de infinitos, que eu herdei dos meus ancestrais e que nos trouxeram até aqui, a todos nós que fomos retirados do continente africano e formamos a diáspora negra. E aí já entro na questão seguinte: eu não me vejo como parte de uma diáspora queer, eu me vejo como parte de uma diáspora negra, de uma diáspora africana, né? E por que isso? Para que eu me visse como integrante de uma diáspora queer, eu penso que eu precisaria ter exercer algum tipo de ativismo LGBT, e eu não faço isso, né? E aí vocês podem me perguntar: mas então você teria você exerceria um ativismo negro, um ativismo racial? Também não. Eu quero cada vez mais que o meu trabalho tenha uma marca política. Eu sou uma autora que acho impossível que a gente não seja político naquilo que a gente diz, naquilo que a gente faz, naquilo que a gente escreve. Entretanto, o ativismo político, né, para mim, na minha compreensão, é diferente da produção literária. O que me interessa é a produção literária. E o que me liga à diáspora africana são os meus pertencimentos de ancestralidade. É isso que me coloca nessa diáspora que eu entendo que eu faço parte, essa diáspora a qual eu pertenço, que é a diáspora africana, é a diáspora negra.
Thank you, Cidinha. Raphael?
You're asking us about being a queer writer in a time of increasing authoritarianism and the spaces that have opened up or closed up. And, you know, a part of me wants to talk about how many friends of mine, Arab queers and queers of color, were in a very bad way when this lockdown started. I mean, we were already on the margins, and then we were just basically feeling like we're being shoved off the edge even. And so in the beginning, I had a lot of panic, and actually somebody in our community took her own life, and this shook us very, very deeply for queers around the world. She was Egyptian, and she had been prosecuted, and so she had a lot of trauma. And so we came together as Arab queers to see what that meant, and to look ourselves in the eye. And then something happened with me where that panic was transcended, and those spaces where I saw the spaces closing up, as your question asks, somehow a new space opened. And that happened because I was locked in this room of mine in Berlin. And in the beginning, you know, we weren't sure if it's going to be like the plague of the Middle Ages, where it's that deadly and that contagious. No one was really sure. We were very afraid. I had social anxiety for the first time in my life. Even the times when I did go out, I mean, I'm very extroverted. It was very surprising for me to experience that. So I was staying home, and I was reading a lot about plant medicine, and thinking a lot about the ancestral plant medicine of where I come from in Jordan, and thinking about my aunt also, who was teaching this to us as a child. But you know, when I was a child, it wasn't very cool, and I wasn't paying attention. I wanted to do other things. I wanted to read books and to learn about Western things, not about the plants that she was picking and taking us along with to pick. So suddenly this space opened up for me, which was a space from ancient times and from the past. And it made me believe that as queers, we have a responsibility, an ancestral responsibility, because you know, our place in pre-colonial societies was medicine people and shamans and artists. Being an artist for me, increasingly it means to be a healer and to have that role. Whereas when you put us in a capitalistic structure, it's an entertainer. And so part of me was feeling very rebellious about having to be an entertainer or being called an entertainer. And I was asking myself, you know, why, you know, because I'm in my 40s now, and I've seen, and queers, you know, we didn't have the kind of visibility, or I want to say mainstream acceptance, even though there's a lot to be desired. When I say that, I'll put that in quotes. But nowadays, it's like I'm invited to be on a panel, and this kind of thing wouldn't happen 20 years ago. And so I feel that more and more the mainstream is looking to us and calling on us to play that role and to give us the answers, because it became clear with the pandemic that we're headed to an Anthropocene, we're headed to something apocalyptic, and somebody has to lead the way. And I don't mean that in a pretentious way where it's like, you know, in the way of power that we know in the world that's being abused, this very authoritarian way that we're talking about, but a spiritual way, a guidance way, a healing way, a medicine way. I think it's not an accident that, you know, in colonial countries, the gender queers and the medicine people were the first to be killed and prosecuted. It's because we have a window to another way. And I think very much so, you're seeing that in mainstream queer communities. Everybody's looking to the tarot, everybody's getting involved in astrology, and those things are becoming quite mainstream now. Is because we're being called on, I think, as queer people to play our historical role, and that is to guide people into what's coming next, because this racist, capitalistic, sexist regime that that's taken over the world for hundreds of years is showing, and the necropolitics, you know, that Cidinha was talking about, this is a manifestation of more and more of that. It's not like an exception, it's not a bug, it's part of it's a feature, as they say. So but it's always been clear to so many of us, and now it's becoming clear on a wider scale as people were sitting there. You know, mothers are having to stay home with their kids more and more, and it's just becoming clear to people how this system has failed. And so for me, that's the space that's opened up. And so whereas where I was once writing literature, I feel now more interested in words used to be spells. And for me, that's, as Natalia was saying, it's like, what are they? I don't even know. I don't know what words are, and I don't know the power of them. And so for me, that's become what's interesting, much more than literature. It's like looking beyond this, the mask is fallen, and here we are. So that's maybe how I would answer your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Natalia?
Well, first, I would like to say that I will speak after Cidinha, after what Cidinha said, because she stated things that are really important in Brazil. And my experience as a queer woman in Brazil, as a lesbian woman, is totally different from hers. So this is one point. In Brazil is a very, very big and different in country. I mean, the tensions they hit us differently everywhere, every time. So it's kind of exhausting being here, being alive here, working, trying to write, trying to be somehow positive in this context, when we have that horrible man that calls himself a president, doing nothing for us. I mean, no, that's a lie. He's trying to kill everybody. So, and he's being successful. So it's very hard to wake up in the morning and think, oh, I'm going to write a book about a collapse, society, a collapse in society. That's what I wrote about recently. But the exercise is kind of torturing, because we revive the things that are so hurtful and painful for us. Anyways, I have to say that when my book Amora, this one, sorry, I'll show you. This is the United States and UK version. When it came out in 2015, people asked me who were my references when I wrote Amora, and I said, I don't have any. I don't know any. I knew something like 4 writers that had written books with lesbian characters, and Amora is a book that has only lesbian characters. It's a short story book. and all the stories have these lesbian characters. And then I started to ask myself about it. Where are those women writers and those characters? Because I'm not naive. I know they are out there. I know people are writing about that. Cidinha was one of them, and I didn't know that. So we got to be friends, right, Cidinha? And readers also. We read each other. But the thing is, I'm very grateful to this book because I got to meet a lot of other writers and readers too. And I talked to them and they told me that they really wanted to see lesbian characters in novels and movies and whatever, telenovelas, because here we are very big about telenovelas. And there weren't many. And when they were there, they were not very, you know, representative. I mean, yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about it, but that was it. There was a complete lack of these characters that we could mirror ourselves. I mean, as a lesbian woman, I say. So when I wrote Amora, I decided to write this book with only lesbian characters. And from that moment on, I would only write books with lesbian main characters or whatever. So I was asked, oh, but that will be, I mean, why are you going to write about lesbians every time? I'm not writing about lesbians. The characters are. They do whatever they want. They can go to the moon. They can, I don't know, pay a bill in the bank. They can just sit and do nothing. So I'm not writing about lesbians. I'm writing with them. I'm writing because I want to give them protagonism. And that's the difference, I guess. So I also received lots of questions that mean things. For example, one journalist asked me if with Amora I wanted to, oh, maybe Jeremy will have to help me with this. He said, or the translator, he said, com Amora você quer escancarar o universo lésbico? I don't know escancarar in English, but he asked me if I wanted to open wide the lesbian universe for them. And I said, no, that there wasn't any lesbian universe. We live together in the same universe. So we don't live in separate universes. If he was not seeing that, that was a big problem. And that is a big problem because we're not seen in arts and our work was not being recognized. And when we are seeing like stereotypes or not capable to do so. And if you are, I don't know, if you are gay, it's something, but if you are a gay person with disability, it's even worse. Or if you are transgender, they really don't see you. If you are a Black woman, they see you, but they don't like you. So it's kind of hard. Thanks to Amora, I got to meet lots of writers. So I have this research now in my doctorate, which is called Lesbian Geographies. I started this research because I wanted to find these writers. And I thought that this was important because I was trying to do something and I knew that there were others trying to do something else, something different or the same thing. And I started this with 25 writers. And now I have 541 writers. So yeah, good luck to me trying to work with all of this, but it's good. I got to meet some of them, really meet, like we talk about our production, we talk about our writing, we talk about what it means to be writing as a queer woman, as a lesbian woman now in Brazil. And it's multiple, and it's beautiful, and it's sad. But we are here. So, yeah. Okay. I think just one more thing. Amora brought me lots of things. It brought me this project, this mapping that I get to meet lots of women. But when I wrote for a newspaper, and then Cidinha told us that she wrote Crônicas, which is not a very known genre. I mean, genre. It was worse because it was a weekly opinion article in the newspaper, and I always try to put myself out there, because then it was not a narrator or a narrator that signed, or the author that with the book published. It was my name in the newspaper. And then it was very bad, because I couldn't be a lesbian woman writing in a newspaper. That was not acceptable. And it was not only because I was talking about marriage or equality or health, or it was because I couldn't speak. It was not good for them to listen to what I have to say. And I have to tell you that was in the context of Bolsonaro's campaign. So that is even worse, because arts, like being an artist, being a teacher or a professor, or being queer, being Black, everything was being, sorry, I have to connect to my computer here, destroyed by his campaign, by this government. And yeah, that was the context. And I stopped writing for the newspaper. So yeah, I think I will stop here.
Thank you. And Saleem?
Yeah, I mean, the questions sort of throw up a lot of different avenues to go down. So I thought, rather than kind of speak to all of them, I would just sort of pick one and then speak to that. So I guess I'd like to maybe focus for my sort of short intervention around questions of queer writing in the context of the dominant narratives around the Middle East and the Arab world. I think when you're writing, the political context of a piece can't be disentangled from the questions of audience and language that you're writing in, because language itself is a political context. Not just because certain words have certain cultural baggage, but if we see language as the terrain in which a story travels, how that story will be understood and interpreted will differ considerably from one language to another. And those of you who are watching who can read and understand multiple language know this already, especially if you've ever tried to read the same book in 2 different languages. The same novel will be understood and will make you feel very differently in one language versus another. When it came to writing Guapa, I knew that by virtue of writing the novel in English, the novel would be traveling in a very different terrain than it would have had I written the novel in Arabic. On a certain level, I knew that I would have a more sympathetic audience in English than I would have if I had written the novel in Arabic, one that was maybe more accepting of alternative sexualities. But at the same time, I was mistrustful of this acceptance on some level. There's the historical political context to the English language, and especially vis-a-vis stories about the Arab world, when it comes to Orientalist imageries, but also specifically when it comes to depictions of both Arab sexuality and Arab attitudes towards sexuality. And there are a few of them, and I can go into them. You know, there's some arguments that sort of talk about the conceptions of a gay or lesbian identity as Western identity categories that are alien to the Arab world. And this type of thinking was really dominant over the last 20 years, ironically in academic centers in North America rather than in the Middle East. And this sort of thinking led to the argument that at the extreme, gay activists in the Middle East were a form of Western imperialism. And on the other end of that spectrum, queer Arab and queer Muslim suffering was and remains weaponized to demonstrate the backwardness of Arab and Muslim societies. This is the case, especially when it comes to things like Israeli pinkwashing efforts, one that seeks to paint Israel as this beacon of freedom and democracy and gay rights and women's rights, in juxtaposition to the oppressive and backwards Palestinian society. And the combination of these two forces, among many others, were very paralyzing for queer Arab self-expression and activism over the last 20 years. And so when I was writing Guapa, I was cognizant of the fact that Guapa would be entering and engaging within this political context and would be read and understood within that context. So while writing, I felt that I had to break through a number of different barriers. I had to break through my own internalized shame and fear of writing queerly, of allowing myself to be vulnerable, having grown up in a context where male vulnerability was punished. But then beyond that, I also felt that I had a responsibility to be mindful of the different audiences who were going to read the book and the political context of the English language that I was writing in. And especially in later edits of the novel, I was editing in what I would call a very paranoid way, trying to subvert and challenge some of these conceptions in which the text might be read. So I was reading and editing the novel through the eyes of different types of audiences that I imagined would read it. This, of course, is a really paranoid way to write, but I felt that I had a responsibility to be mindful of the multiple audiences that would engage with my text. And I think to a certain degree, I was right to be paranoid, because I think even for Arab queers, many came to the novel with a paranoid mindset. And I admit that I sometimes do this as well. There's a certain suspicion that I have when approaching a queer cultural product from the Middle East, because we are so aware of the ways that our narratives and stories have been weaponized against us. We become mistrustful when members of our own community enter into the public realm with their own stories and narratives. And I would argue then that we need to do more as a community to approach our literature and our sources of cultural production in a more reparative rather than paranoid approach. Not just for the sake of the queers who are putting themselves in the public realm, but also for ourselves as readers and consumers of this cultural product, because the reparative reading of our stories and narratives is what builds solidarity and what creates the environment that's needed for healing. I think I'll end by saying that, despite what I was saying about the paranoid approach to editing and reading the text of Guapa, my experience of publishing was a very positive one. And I think the novel itself was embraced in a way that I was not expecting. My paranoid mind was not expecting at all. And I think, it created, I think it empowered a lot of people, and it created a much needed space for dialogue for a lot of people. So in the end, I think all the stages of barriers that I had to go through were worthwhile and sort of paid off in the process. So I'll stop there, I think, just an initial intervention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all. I mean, so much already. Before I continue, I just wanted to tell the audience that we invite you to put your questions in the Q&A function. And those of you who follow us via YouTube, you can also add your question via YouTube, and someone will pass those questions on to you. So yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you've already been saying. I mean, for me, what I'm hearing, I'm hearing a lot, but what kind of stands out, I guess, is sort of on the one hand, literature as a genre, creative genre, what it offers, but also, maybe the tensions between activism and literature, and that's not static. I mean, it's not only that it's maybe specific to you as a person, as a creative person, as a political person in a specific context, whether it's Brazil or the Middle East, but of course, also as time goes on and we face different challenges. And I guess what for me came out really strongly in your contributions is yes, there is political authoritarianism, and of course there are lots of parallels in terms of Brazil and the Middle East, and I would say in the United States where I'm now. But also, of course, very importantly and acutely, the impact of COVID-19 that in so many ways has intensified the inequalities and forms of marginalizations that people all over the globe had already experienced, and it's particularly affecting LGBTQI communities across the globe. And I was reminded when Natalia was speaking about, this issue of not writing, not creating a lesbian universe. I mean, it reminds me also of this debate: is this feminist literature, or is this literature? Is this queer literature, or is this literature? I mean, that I think is also I'm hearing in what you're saying. But I mean, I have lots of questions, but I'm wondering whether you maybe have questions for each other or comments. I mean, given that we're sharing this space, I thought that maybe you would like to follow up in terms of the different contributions. If not, I mean, while you're thinking, I have another question for you, which is that of genre, because you all work with very different genres, and some of you work with multiple genres, and then there is the issue of, I guess, writing, and then there's the issue of, there's theater, and I was just wondering if you could reflect a little bit on the genres that you work in, and what why you prefer a specific genre, what that genre allows you to do, what you sometimes feel sort of frustrated by, and I am going to go in a different order and ask Saleem to start first, if you're okay with that.
Yes. So I think I kind of see myself as a storyteller more than anything else. But my specific I tend to gravitate towards writing. And I think for me, literature is the closest that we can come to inhabiting another person's consciousness. And I've done other forms of storytelling. And for me, I always find myself gravitating towards literature for that reason. I think it just allows this level of intimacy that I think that speaks to me as an artist, and allows me to it's very therapeutic, because it allows me to make conscious all the feelings and emotions that are in my own subconscious. And I think it's also a very intimate experience with readers who come to my writing as well. And I think for queer writing especially, it's particularly important.
Yeah. Great. Natalia, would you like to say something to that question?
Sure. I agree with Saleem. I think I see myself as a storyteller too, and it's a nice way to put it. For example, I love writing short stories. I think they are great, and you can, and they are a great exercise too. I mean, I see writing as an exercise, as a continuous exercise. So this is something that I'm really into. But lately, I've been more attracted to novels. So this was my most recent novel, like Controle, which is like my T-shirt is background. I'm kidding. I also agree with Saleem when he says that it's the closest thing that we can to be inside a person's mind or conscious, because really Controle, it was a novel for that. It was all about language and how this character would develop. It's a coming of age novel about this queer girl. And lately, I've also wanted to explore dystopias. Why? So I wrote this Corpus Secus, which doesn't have a translation for English. Yeah, this Jeremy, this one. which is more kind of a zombie post-apocalyptical project with other 4 writers, which was nice. It was a collective project. And next year, there's something new out that also is a dystopia. And also, I think novels are better for exploring, I don't know, ways of seeing the future, ways of trying to cope with this collapsing world. For me, something interesting to try to build, and I think the novel is the space, the adequate space for that.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. Raphael?
I feel interesting enough the same thing, like to say that actually documentary is the best way to get into a person's, into a character's mind and body, and acting. Like I started off wanting to be an actor and being a frustrated actor, and that's how I got into writing. And also I feel because there was no queer and trans plays when I started writing, it had to be somehow, I want to put realistic in quotations, because the more that I write documentary, the more I realize how subjective it is and how much it's about my imagination, maybe more so than a fiction writer's. So I actually feel like they're more documentary than I am. And that's been a surprise for me. And the reason I chose it is because, yeah, it's like kind of, and when you go to art school, you have to learn to draw realistically, and then you go and do your own style and voice and expression. It's kind of felt kind of like that. Like I was saying, because those scripts didn't exist, we had to put the actual voices of people up there before, you know, now there's a lot of other Arabs writing queer theater and literature, and it's maybe a luxury, I felt, to kind of have a fantastical, an imagined queer play, but it was in its own way. I don't know if this answers.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. Cidinha, what about you and genre?
Sim, eu penso bastante próximo dos colegas, né, que falaram antes, das 3 pessoas que falaram antes. Eu me vejo como prosadora, né? Eu escrevo prosa, eu gosto de criar histórias e tenho me dedicado às histórias curtas, às crônicas e aos contos. E, para mim, é sempre um desafio entender o que é uma coisa e o que é outra, né? Para mim, é importante entender isso. Aqui no Brasil, várias pessoas da área de teoria chamam alguns dos meus textos de croniconto, que seria uma espécie híbrida entre crônica e conto. Particularmente, eu não gosto desse termo. Eu acho que é mais uma forma de desqualificar a crônica. Há pessoas que chegam a dizer assim, crônica não existe, se for bem escrito é conto. Acabou, é conto. Tem isso, né? E aí me parece que é uma forma de desqualificar esse gênero, de tentar adjetivá-lo, porque crônica só não tem importância, né? E aí criam essa categoria aí do croniconto. Eu não gosto disso, é uma classificação que algumas pessoas utilizam, eu não utilizo, não me valho dela, né? E esses dias, essa semana, eu estive participando de uma coisa na Universidade de Princeton, né? Você viu, Jeremy? E um dos temas que a gente conversou foi esse, né? Essa diferença, como é que eu vejo a diferença entre conto e crônica, né? O conto, eu entendo que ele tem personagens que são muito bem construídos, que são redondos. E na crônica você pode ter personagens ou não. E no conto, a gente nunca conta tudo para o leitor. E na crônica você pode contar ou não. Né? Essas são as duas diferenças centrais para mim. Né? Eu ainda não tenho nenhum romance escrito, é algo que está na perspectiva, né? Na minha perspectiva próxima de fazer, mas é algo também que me deixa um tanto insegura, porque eu tenho a sensação que depois de começar a escrever romances, eu não volto para as histórias curtas. Eu tenho essa sensação, não sei se isso vai acontecer. Então, como eu tenho muitos projetos de histórias curtas, eu vou me dedicando a esses projetos e vou postergando a escrita de um romance, porque eu ainda não consegui lidar bem com esse medo. Não sei como é isso, a Natalia, que tem experiências distintas, né? Os colegas, o Saleem e o Raphael, eu não conheço a trajetória deles, né? A Natalia eu conheço. Então, eu não sei se esse medo se é uma bobagem apenas, mas é um temor que eu tenho, né? Eu vou postergando porque eu temo não escrever outras coisas depois, ficar completamente mergulhada na escrita dos romances.
Thank you, Cidinha. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a first round of reading out some questions, a few questions. We have quite a number, and then ask Jeremy to follow up. So first of all, to Raphael and Saleem, we have a question from Jonas, who's asking if you know whether your works are going to be published in Brazil, or when your works are going to be published in Brazil. So that's great. Then we have Nasser Mekhan, who's saying obrigado, shukran, also to Raphael and Saleem. What spaces do you believe literature could open up for the Middle Eastern queer community, perhaps beyond spaces of suffering? From Paola Rivetti, thanks, it's so interesting. I'm interested in technologies, both the internet and medical technologies, from surgery to medication, or even makeup and condoms, Dentaldam. I was wondering if you could speak to the possibilities, limitations that such technologies open up close down for you as writers and queer subjects on the front line, in terms of, for instance, ability to speak up, build community, defy authoritarianism, how technologies might subvert gender binary systems, and even replace obedience and deference to authority with disobedience, if that's a thing. And then finally, I'm going to ask this question from Laila Kashani Sabit, who's saying, as a queer Iranian woman, I struggle to reconcile my two identities. Firstly, because of homophobia in Iran. Secondly, because of extreme whiteness in queer spaces in the US. Can you talk about your process of reconciling your identities and how theater or writing has helped you with this? Thank you very much. Very appreciative of this space and all your honesty. So would ever like to answer any of these questions?
It's a lot to remember.
I know. I don't know. Can you see the Q&A actually? Do you have access to it?
Ah, okay.
So these are
there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. For me, publishing, if I may, is in theater. Publishing is when you are staged rather than when it's printed in a book, and that's something in theater we tend to fall between the gaps of theater as playwrights, between the gaps of theater and literature, and often we get forgotten in literature events and forgotten in theater events, and so that's a difficult gap to have to live in. And so publishing for me, and it's maybe not known, but when it comes on stage, and I would love to have it on stage in Brazil, I have no idea how it works, but if Jonas wants to talk, I would love that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Brazilian music, and yeah, it would be wonderful. It just hasn't happened. It's just hasn't. And I feel also very sad now hearing about chronicles, that I've never read a chronicle in my life, and I didn't know this genre existed, 2 hours ago. And so this is I need to learn Portuguese and read those, because I've been robbed of something amazing, it sounds like.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to come in?
Yeah, I can come in and just try and answer some of the questions really quickly. The question around the identity reconciliation, I think for me, it was very much writing Guapa was my way of kind of reconciling a lot of these different identities that I didn't feel fit together. And I think the process of writing it really helped me reconcile these identities. And identity is always something that is shifting. So it's funny because people often speak to me, who've read Guapa, and speak to me as if I'm the character, or as if I'm struggling with the same identity issues that the character is struggling through. And I often have to tell them that A, I'm not the character, but B, my identity is always shifting. So the identity crisis that I'm currently going through, you will read in my next book. So I'm like, I'm one identity crisis ahead of what other people are reading about me. So I think it's always this wonderful thing about, just as you think you've solved one identity crisis, another one emerges and confuses you. I just wanted to say something and then kind of
wait till you hit 40.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I wanted to just touch a bit on the question of authoritarianism. First of all, my novel sadly is not translated yet into Portuguese. But because I live in Lisbon at the moment, I know a lot of Brazilian people, and I can see so many echoes between my own experiences and the experiences of Brazilians who have recently left Brazil, and for lots of different reasons, politics being among them. And so I think the novel would speak to Brazilian readers. So I hope it gets published in Portuguese soon. But I was thinking about the question that was posed to us early on around authoritarianism and the role of queer, and sort of what space there is for queer writing in authoritarianism. And I kept thinking over and over again about the military parade that happened a few weeks ago in Egypt, and then again it happened in Algeria. And it was this military parade that basically had these shirtless and oiled up bodybuilders in these tight army trousers, and they were flexing and doing push-ups, and it was all so very serious and all so very queer. But it was so queer, and yet there was also nothing queer about it. And it was like this very strange mental headspace to be in. And you can just Google it and you will find it. It's bizarre. And I think that's because queerness is all about an expansion. It's about an openness. It's about questioning the values and norms that we consider normal. And authoritarianism rests on the belief that there's only one way of existing and only one way of looking at the world. So in theory, queerness can really be a revolutionary idea, and it can be a form of resistance. And that's how I like to see my own writing and my own approach to thinking about the world. But as we've just seen, from all of the panelists speaking, we're also in a very, very difficult and dark time where I think it's very nice to speak about queerness as a resistance in theory, but in practice, we're all just really struggling to survive. And the death of Sarah Higazi, I think, really brought it home to us as like the queer, diasporic, Arab, and Middle Eastern community, that we are all really struggling to survive, and we are all very angry. And I'm feeling a lot of rage. And for me now, as a queer Arab person, I need to reconcile with the immense rage and disappointment I feel with my own society, and especially with the straight society. And I haven't forgiven them, and I don't know if I ever will.
Yeah. Thank you. I suggest, because we have so many questions and some are more directly addressed to Natalia and Cidinha. So maybe Jeremy, you can read out a few questions.
Give me 2 seconds because I wasn't actually following those questions. I do want to follow up briefly with this idea. Okay, instead of thinking about art literature in terms of like a direct political intervention, I think it's where I was going. And there are instances, Cidinha, I'm thinking about your book, Para Nos Matar, that has appeared in protests. That is literally, it became kind of the slogan that was there, and your book was part of that. So although not the intention, it is integrated into a resistance. So this idea, but it's also opening up or creating empathy, right? That all of your works create space to view the world differently, to refuse the narrative, Raphael, of what you're referring to, right? To refuse that single narrative that becomes imposed. And in that way, what you're writing is essential. And in these dark times, that empathy is everything. Because although, Saleem, you're saying the rage that you're feeling, your works offer empathetic spaces for, I guess, society to move into when we're facing dark times. Anyways, a comment if anybody has a follow-up there, and I'm going to scan for a moment.
Well, maybe while you're thinking, Jeremy, should I just quickly read out a couple of questions that, and it links also to what has been said before. Sarah Martin is asking, to all writers, how are you taking care of yourself in this time? I find myself barely able to write right now, and having heard Natalia and Suginia's stories, I feel like it must be so hard to keep producing in this environment. And then there's a question specifically to Natalia by Carolina Ferreira. Thinking about your research on lesbian geographies and your characters in Amora and Controle, can you develop a little bit about the role or influence of authorship as a lesbian in the development of characters who share the lesbian experience? Do we have in modern contemporary Brazilian literature non-queer authors writing intensively about lesbian queer female characters that you know? And then one more question here. Yes, I'd love to hear from Gar Adams. I'd love to hear just a bit more discussion about these two considerations in conversation with one another. Raphael's statement about queer artists as having an ancestral responsibility as healers, and Saleem's words about academics like, you didn't mention, but this person mentioned Joseph Massad's declaring LGBTQ activists in MENA as a kind of colonial import. So this is lots of disparate questions. Anyone who'd like to come in, I mean, maybe Cidinha, if you'd like to come in on that, that question about survival, you've already reflected on that. And so as you were telling us, that surviving now is, the most important thing that you need to focus on. How do you manage to write at all, and how do you manage to do that?
Na verdade, escrever faz parte da sobrevivência, em dois sentidos. No sentido econômico, porque boa parte do trabalho que eu desenvolvo e que me remunera tem a ver com a escrita, né? Demandas para periódicos, para portais de notícias. Então, a sobrevivência me impele a escrever, né? E a outra, o que não acontece é uma escrita por deleite ou por desejo. Essa escrita que não tem espaço nesse momento, como aquela escritora ou aquele escritor que se isola do mundo, se isola da pandemia e escreve. É isso que não é possível para mim. Eu escrevo dentro da pandemia, como estratégia de sobrevivência econômica, inclusive, mas sem aspectos de prazer, de alegria, que são mais frequentes no meu trabalho com a escrita. Eu não tenho experimentado isso durante a pandemia. Então, isso para dizer como é que eu trabalho com a escrita como uma parte também da minha sobrevivência. E outras coisas, além disso, né, tentar, a gente, por mais que a preocupação seja com a sobrevivência, eu estou no grupo de pessoas, das pessoas que não perderam o trabalho, que não sofreram questões econômicas graves nesse período. Dessa forma, eu me coloquei num lugar de quem tem possibilidade de ajudar, não de quem precisa ser ajudada. Então, eu exerci e exerço esse lugar com muita responsabilidade. Isso implica, por exemplo, em ter momentos do dia que a coisa necessária a ser feita é ouvir alguém próximo que não está tendo as condições mentais saudáveis que eu consegui manter, né? Então, esse tipo de troca, esse tipo de escuta às pessoas é algo que me lembra também que eu estou bem. E isso me ajuda a sobreviver, isso me ajuda a ficar bem, saber que eu tenho condição de oferecer coisas, né? De oferecer atenção, de oferecer alguns tipos de recursos para pessoas que estão muito desestruturadas nesse período que é muito desestruturador, né? O que eu não consigo, reiterando, é ter uma atitude frente à literatura que seja uma atitude isolada desse contexto que a gente está sendo obrigada a viver, né? E que a gente precisa enfrentar para ter alguma possibilidade de futuro.
Yes, thank you, Cidinha. Natalia, would you like to address there was one question directly to you, but also any of the other questions?
Sure. Well, first of all, for me, it's more or less the same as with Cidinha. I have to work, I have to pay rent, I have to pay my bills, I have to help people. I have people that depend on me. So I also haven't lost my job. I have a fellowship from the university. So that puts me in a very comfortable position right now. But it's difficult. I have to write, I have to work with my head and think about writing and this theoretical perspectives of what is it to be a lesbian writer, blah blah. So I have to address that. That is what I'm paid for, and that is what I love to do. But it is hard. It is hard. So I am writing. I am writing something, some things, and I'm also a translator. So this is also a part of my job. I basically write the whole day. So I have to do that. I have no choice. It would be good to live in a country where I could do that with my head or my mind free and not thinking about Bolsonaro trying to kill us all the time. Yeah, it would be nice, but it's not possible right now. So I have to do the things with all these things going on around me. About the other question, I think it was Carolina Ferreira, right? Well, my research, Geografias Lésbicas, lesbian geographies, in this research, I map women author, lesbian, bisexual, transgender women that identified as lesbian. And I try to see what they are writing, and then I try to analyze those writings on space. I try to think about what kind of spaces they are building in this kind of novel. So about the character, I can answer about Amora and Controle. And I think, yes, it is different when you have a lesbian woman writing about her existence or experience in the world. Precisely because being a lesbian, being a writer is the same thing as being in the world and reflecting about being in this world. And if you are a writer, so you are going to do that with your body, with the things you feel, how you understand the world, with your rage, with your anger, with all the things that you are going through. And this changes the way you put yourself out there. This changes the way you build your characters fictionally. So I think there is a difference. I don't know if we have modern or contemporary Brazilian literature, non-queer authors writing intensively about this, but that's what we had to read until, I think things changed a bit in the 2000s. I think we could find more women authors, lesbian authors. Internet helped us to dig these productions, but I don't know if we still have non-queer authors intensely writing about lesbian characters. And I don't know, I think I would read lesbian writers and see if they are intensely writing about ourselves.
Thank you. So I guess I'd like to hear from both Raphael and Saleem. Obviously, any of the questions that you'd like to address, but then there was a question specifically addressed to you in terms of what the person perceives to be a kind of tension between, Raphael speaking about the historical role of, queers in terms of medicine, in terms of healing, and then the kind of construction of, more, I guess, less queer than LGBT identities being Western imports, as was articulated by Joseph Massad. So would like to start. Raphael, would you like to have a first call?
Sure. I'm trying to see the questions. The one about self-care. How are you taking care of yourself as writers? I find myself barely able to write now. This is Sarah Martin. It must be so hard to keep producing in this environment. Yes, in the beginning, I felt like, when you're in a catastrophe, you can't really talk. It's sacrilegious even to talk about it in the moment, and you can't. Even historians, they don't write about things until 10 years after they've passed. So I think it's the same with writing. And I experienced that in the beginning, where it was a time of reading and reflection. And then it was like, I have to get to work. It's something else kicked in, and it wasn't a kind of capitalist thing of, oh, you're so lazy. It was like, no, there's work to be done. And I think Egypt plays a big part of that for me. Is like, there's, especially Egyptian musicians, there's like 5 new groundbreaking Egyptian music albums coming out in the independent scene. And for me, that was a personal inspiration to see those artists who are working under very difficult conditions and on every level, coming out with this immense level of energy. And it's contagious. And for me, I surround myself with people who work harder under adversity. And I know that's not always easy, and it's not always the right thing to do, but there's a moment and you feel it when you have to kick into the reverse gear and do exactly the opposite and not whine, because there's a lot of artists in Berlin also that are whining. And, you know, we lost a lot of work in the performing arts. Almost all of us are out of work. And here too, it's even, you know, more precarious. And so me personally, it's like I take time to grieve and then I go to, and then I surround myself with people who are doing the opposite and channeling that. About there's question. Gar asked a question about ancestral responsibilities as healers. I'm not sure what he wants to know exactly more about, or what he's asking us to discuss more about. Maybe you know, Nadje, or you could help. So I'll just address another question, which is about having multiple identities, which was addressed to Saleem and I, and writing in the diaspora. I think one thing that became very clear to me as I produced a transgender play in Vienna was like, I heard stories about, I took a comfort in the fact that the level of transphobia and homophobia were almost identical in places like Europe than they are back home. And I don't say that lightly. I don't say that to be anti-imperialist. It's genuinely, I found that it's the laws in Europe that actually protect queers and trans, rather than there being a genuine open-mindedness more than us Arabs. And so for me, that's how I reconciled writing in diaspora or something. It was like, I heard about an Austrian guy who had to get married in front of his family, even though he was gay. And so it was, there's a lot of that happens, and that's how I managed to feel at home in Europe. I was like, okay, I know this.
Yeah. And then of course there is the fact that Berlin is not Europe. I mean,
yeah. But Berlin, you'll be very surprised. A lot of my trans women friends, especially trans women, experience people spitting them in Berlin. There's so much racism against Black people in Berlin. It's a really tough city. You go there thinking it's going to be a little, you know, island of lost boys like in Pinocchio, and it's, in fact, it's a very tough, racist, transphobic, and homophobic city. So yeah, those kinds of things wake you up. Yeah.
Yeah, gosh. Saleem, would you like to engage with any of the questions?
Yeah, the question on the ancestral healing, I think is maybe not for me to answer, just because I'm not really familiar with it, with sort of healing techniques or that sort of thing. It's just not my forte, although it sounds very interesting. The self-care, I think it's been very hard, and I think it's very hard being away from, you know, and my family is in Lebanon, and it's been a very tough year for Lebanon, and we were going to move to Lebanon, and so this is, you know, the coronavirus situation has made me, I've always resisted the idea of calling myself an exile, writer in exile, but something shifted for me this year. I think it was the death of Sarah in June, and the grief and rage that I felt, and the sense of loss. And I think, you know, seeing what's happening in Lebanon and feeling very helpless, and the coronavirus situation, which makes it very difficult to travel, I think I've more and more just been trying to figure out where I stand and how do I write in relation to where I'm standing. You know, as a diasporic writer, whatever that means, or as a writer in exile, whatever that means, I haven't really got the answers to these questions, but they're questions that are very heavy on my mind at the moment.
Well, thank you all. I mean, we have so many questions, and I would like to send my sincere apologies to the audience who sent in all these really interesting questions. Can only say that, you know, we're hoping to continue this conversation, that this is only the beginning. I hope that we, in the future, we will be able to read Cidinha's and Natalia's work in Arabic, Iranian, Turkish, and Kurdish, in the various languages of the Middle East. And we hope that Raphael's and Saleem's work will be published and performed in Brazil. And I think that would be fantastic to see these exchanges. I thank you all so much. It's been wonderful, Cidinha, to listen to you, to Natalia, Raphael, Saleem. It was a very, very interesting discussion. I thank the audience, of course, Jeremy, who's been co-hosting this event with us, and everyone from the Watson Institute, particularly Barbara Oberkötter. We will make this event available as a recording, so I will send it to all of you, and then we can hopefully circulate it. And next semester, Jeremy and myself are planning to organize a follow-up conversation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I can just say thank you also to our interpreters, Marina Adams and Jordan Jones. I didn't hear you, but I'm sure you did a wonderful job. So thank you. Thank you to the panelists for being here, taking the time to spend with us to talk today.